Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to take a look at the latest crisis, another one, over gas prices at this point, from the point of view of how Brexit is driving up inflation well above the meagre pay increases that people are receiving in the Tories' Brexit Britain. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So a few days ago, the news came in that inflation was soaring as a result of higher prices for food, restaurants, recreation. The general trend of high inflation this year has been linked to rising food prices, fuel, and the cost of second-hand cars. And obviously inflation is a fact of life. It's not that it didn't exist before Brexit. Prices go up. For example, the increasing costs of second-hand cars is not, as far as I can tell, Brexit. It's because we've come out of lockdown. There's a high demand for cars because a load of people just weren't buying cars during lockdown, of course. But a low supply of chips. So therefore people are having to buy second-hand cars rather than new cars. Food and fuel are also subject to global pressures. And this is how Brexiteers are trying to distract attention away from the consequences of Brexit. It's like, if it's not entirely down to Brexit, oh, it's not Brexit at all. Or it might be Brexit, but it's a very tiny amount of Brexit. And I do find it ironic, though, that they now blame our helpless position in the global supply chain for problems when this was a core argument for Remainers. We're connected to the world. We're connected to the world in its markets. We depend upon having influence over those global supply chains. And we said it was reckless to throw this away. But Brexit was all about pretending we could disconnect ourselves from the world and profit. Well, we're not profiting. And although there are global pressures on the supply chain, isn't it odd that we are suffering from higher prices, severe shortages, and our European neighbours are not? For them, it's a problem. For us, it's a crisis, a critical shortage. And that's the thing when they try and say, oh yeah, even if it's Brexit, it's just a tiny amount of Brexit. If it was just a tiny amount of Brexit, how come it's only us that has the empty supermarket shelves? How come it's only us that has daily crises on the front pages of our newspapers? And the cause and effect is easy to show as well. We don't have enough farm workers, so we have crops rotting in the fields. That reduces the amount of food that we're producing in the country. In fact, there's a video tomorrow where that's got even worse now. We lost a lot of skilled butchers, so we also can't process a lot of livestock. More reductions in the amount of food that we are producing. This is not offset by growth in any area of food production, so we have a significant net loss of food produced in Britain. That means either shortages or that we have to import more. Either way, price of food goes up, but that's not where it ends. We also have a critical shortage of lorry drivers. Not the shortage of lorry drivers that Brexiteers say, oh, that exists in Europe as well. Yeah, they ain't got empty supermarket shelves, are they? Ours is a critical shortage because we can't cope with it. There are no cancelled deliveries in other European countries. That's only happening in Britain. And this leads to a huge escalation in the cost of food. Not only can't we distribute all the food we have, meaning wastage, but in order to secure drivers from too small a pool of availability, large retailers are having to pay more and more in wages. It's great for the drivers, but it increases their costs. So for those people who aren't benefiting from these higher wages, their cost of living goes up to the point where they can't afford it. But the cost of fuel is also rocketing up. That in itself may not be directly related to Brexit again, but you add that on top of the higher wages needed for lorry drivers, the shortages that we still have of food, the cost of food already rising alarmingly, and it's going to get worse, and the fact that because of the way our governments run our economy, we don't have people whose wages are going up to keep in line with it all. And there's no doubt about that everyone involved in the supply chain has been saying that this is going to happen. We can't process the food we produce ourselves. That's down to Brexit. We struggled with crops last year due to the pandemic, but this year it's Brexit. That we can't get enough lorry drivers, down to Brexit. This was not an issue before, despite the shortages that existed. We had enough. And the drivers we had were able to transport goods efficiently within the large single market, because that's all gone now. We were also braced for a large increase in the cost of energy at home, about 12%, way beyond the ability of people to manage with annual pay increases. So inflation was going to have gone up in September as well anyway. But now we have a serious crisis with gas in the UK. The government were described as scrambling this weekend over the issue. Not really to help solve it as far as I could tell, but simply to calm people down. Now, yes, sure, there's a role for that. There's no sense in people panicking, ever. Even when there's something to panic about. Panic never helps anything, often makes things worse. But I'd be more reassured if I could find what the government were actually doing to deal with the core issues. Because this is another consequence of Brexit, albeit indirect. Even when we get crises that are not a direct result of Brexit. Brexit has forced upon us useless government ministers who spend all their time trying to distract people and who have neither the skill nor the inclination to tackle the problems. So the problems persist and they get worse. And the government are fine with that because they're persuading people that it's beyond their control. In fact, there seems to be so much that's beyond their control, you wonder why the public gave them a massive majority if they don't have the strength to actually improve people's lives with it. That being said, I suspect that in this occasion, the government are seized of the importance of trying to deal with this particular issue. There are huge knock-on effects of gas prices rising out of control. Fuel poverty, distribution costs, and then the knock-on effects of the increase in price for all the goods in need of distributing. I hear the government's plan right now is to offer loans to energy companies to keep them afloat. That's how serious the crisis is. But that seems to be their answer to everything. You know, they tried that with businesses hit by COVID lockdowns last year, but a lot of businesses didn't want to take the loans for fear of never recovering. You know, if they never recovered from the pandemic to be able to pay those loans off on top of everything else, and they went to the wall, well, they just have higher debts. So some of them just cut their losses. What if the same is the case here? Do the government have another plan to help with the gas crisis? Is it all just about, oh, I'll give you a loan? And speaking of gas, so we've also got a shortage of the bubbly variety. So 2 fertiliser plants have closed down as a result of this gas shortage, and that has meant a critical shortage of CO2 byproduct. And problems with the supplies of this. It goes beyond fizzy drinks. This is not. That would be a fairly it'd upset some people, I suppose. But without this source of CO2, much more seriously, the British Meat Processors Association said that they don't know if there'll be any chicken and pork on the shelves in 2 weeks' time. Again, that's how serious this is. If we can't get any CO2, they have to stop processing pigs and poultry. You know, a sector of food production that was already hit before this. We were already hearing stories of shortages this Christmas of both those products. But this shortage now has knackered it. Bernard Matthews, for those who don't know, produces turkeys, has basically already said Christmas is cancelled. That's it, done. But gas shortages are serious for a lot of issues. You know, this is a proper house of cards. We depend upon gas-fired power stations about half our electricity. I mean, that was really always to it. Coal, very dirty to burn, so we've tried to move away from coal. Gas was if you wanted a reliable source of energy, gas-fired power stations is the way we went. That makes sense, but that means we're reliant upon it for about half our electricity. Gas crisis comes along, that's a problem. And that will mean price increases on top of the inflation busting 12% that was already planned. You know, heading into winter, this is going to be dreadful for a lot of people. More will be plunged into poverty over this. More will have to choose between food and heating. To put it into context, the media reporting that Ofgem have increased the price cap from £1,138 per annum to £1,277. So that's the 12% right there. But there are also reports that next spring it could go over £1,500. Now that would be a further 17% rise, or 32% altogether. Struggling families can't manage that. Just that alone would tip hundreds of thousands more people into poverty, even if there weren't also significantly rising costs of food and other essentials. And all the while, the government are reducing these people's incomes. So these people are having to pay much more for their food, much more for their energy, much more for fuel to be able to drive to work for their meagre pay. And also charging them more in taxation now. And we said all along that Brexit would bring poverty. You know, what's been doing the rounds recently, someone clocked an article from The Sun from 2016 where Boris Johnson was claiming, vote Brexit and you'll get cheaper gas bills. You can see why that's doing the rounds now. It's going to be horrendous. And because the Brexiteers insisted that Brexit would bring prosperity. Well, who was right? The people who said it would make us poorer or the people who said it would make us richer? And never mind some of these factors. Oh, they're all linked to Brexit. There's always factors not linked to Brexit. But many of them are directly Brexit. Some of them are compounded by Brexit. And who cares if some aren't Brexit? Like the increase in car prices. Where's the prosperity we were promised to balance these supposedly unrelated costs? You know, so we have a crisis, puts up price of things. That's not a problem because Brexit was supposed to make us richer, so we can absorb those costs. Where's that Brexit prosperity? You know, the fact of the matter is poverty is increasing in Brexit Britain. It's increasing in the number of people in poverty, and it's increasing in severity for those who are already in poverty. We just don't see those concerns at this level around comparable countries in Europe. Another lesson in our global connectivity. The average cost in the UK per megawatt hour electricity is £400. It's about £125 in comparable countries around us. France, £124, Germany, £122, Belgium, £124, and so on. It's all round about the same throughout Europe, round about £125. £400 here. We have the problem. This is why there's an issue in Europe. There's a crisis in Britain. How come the cost across our immediate neighbours in the EU is all similar to one another's, and yet nearly 3 times lower than in Britain? Few factors. There are a few factors, you look at it. But we've left the single market. That's a big one. But the main cable connecting Britain to France is on fire, or it was at any rate. That cost us a lot of supply, hence higher costs for what we could get. We're entirely dependent upon our neighbours. One little or maybe not so little cable gets caught on fire, has huge consequences for us. It's not like we can run an electricity cable to Australia, is it? What a great time to piss off France in return for a closer relationship with nations thousands of miles away, isn't it? For me, it highlights how dependent we are on imports, and imports specifically from our European market, or what used to be our European market, and how our foreign and trade policy is completely arse about face. And yet we chose to leave our seat at the head of the table that decides how that European market runs. And now we're paying well over twice, nearly 3 times really, as much for electricity as the rest of Europe. We're paying more for food, more for transport, more on recreation for those who can afford that. Everything is costing more while we are getting poorer. So tell me again how these are problems affecting everyone. They are problems that are reported as crises rather than simply problems in our national media, because only we elected a government of dangerous charlatans to pursue a mindless ideology that is stripping the country bare for their own benefit and leaving us with the bill. And I'll repeat my message from other videos. This is why the government wants an early general election. The longer their insane rule continues, the more damaging it will be. It might even become too much for the sheeple of this country to bear at some point. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.